Entering the final phase of victory over Hitler's Nazis, Yank armies swarm across Western Germany, bringing devastation to cities of the Reich. From all sides, Allied might crushes in on the remains of the Wehrmacht, bringing home the horrors of war to the German people as they have never experienced it before.
This was the Allied victory. But if you were German, it was your defeat.
And now, we are hated, objects of contempt. We are poor, downtrodden, and despised by all.
The German people had known for some time that they would lose the war. And that they would soon be called to account for what had been done in their names.
My fingers are shaking as I write this. Everyone is now turning their backs on Adolf. No one was ever a supporter. Everyone was persecuted, and no one denounced anyone else. What about me? I was there. I breathed what was in the air. It affected all of us.
This is not the story of how Adolf Hitler seized power in Germany. This is the story of how and why the German people gave it to him.
It's easy to throw stones. Easy to sit in judgment when you're in the midst of abundance, roast chicken, and the good life. We do differently, people say. We would long since have shaken off the dictatorship of Nazi terror. Would they really have?
Some of what you will see has never been shown on American television before. And some of it cannot be shown in Germany, even today. These are their words, their films. This is the rise of the Third Reich. There had once been another war. And another German defeat.
The end of the war meant husbands restored to wives and life restored to men. But there was no sense of joy, only defeat, anxiety, senseless gunfights, confusion.
If you were German In 1919, your peace was humiliation and suffering. Enforced democracy had resulted in chaos. Money was worthless. Vigilantes ruled the streets. Berlin had become a swamp of depravity. Everything and everyone was for sale.
The atmosphere has become revolutionary, apocalyptic. Not only money, but all standards have lost their value. Saviors have appeared everywhere, declaring that they've been sent by God to save the world.
Mystics, magicians, and religious fanatics drew followers desperate for rescue. Each was called a Heiland, or savior. But in German, there is no plural word for savior. There can be only one.
In Munich, there is a corporal who has been causing trouble. They say he has an almost hypnotic power.
It was the 2nd of September, 1923. Here at this nationalist rally, Adolf Hitler made one of his first appearances on film.
They say he puts up signs at his meetings saying, "No entry for Jews." But he has the most persuasive line about German honor and rights for the workers and a new society. And whether you like him or not, he certainly knows what he wants.
Two months after this film was shot, he would attempt to take over Germany and fail. Overnight, Hitler became a national figure. To some magnetic, to others absurd.
The Munich savior filled the headlines with a ridiculous attempt to stage a revolution in a beer cellar. In fact, the revolutionaries had been dispersed by police fire as they left the cellar. And that was the end of the matter.
But it wasn't. The swastika, or Hakenkreuz flag, carried that day by Hitler's National Socialist Party, was stained with the blood of the fallen. From this point forward, Hitler would call it the flag of martyrs, and use it to inspire a growing following of true believers. Nazis.
I feel electrified. A man by the name of Adolf Hitler has tried to restore honor to the German people. I feel with an increasing certainty that a man has arisen to lead the fatherland towards a brighter future.
Here in Bückeburg, in north-central Germany, film hobbyist Adolf von Hinüber shot this film with his 9.5mm camera. "200 miles away, in Berlin, communists were filming these violent clashes with police. But if you were a loyal follower of Adolf Hitler, you would have been here. It was August 2nd, 1929. And the National Socialists were filming their third-party rally, the first here in Nuremberg.
Und unser Führer ein!
100,000 Nazis attended.
Suddenly, Adolf Hitler appears. He goes to each man, shaking his hand. There are things one cannot explain, cannot describe. I never stop thinking of him. Sometimes he meets us in our dreams.
In this footage, Hitler consecrates Nazi Party flags by touching them to the Blutfahne, the blood-stained swastika of his failed revolution. The loyalists were dazzled.
People call him a fool and a dreamer and much more. But what you say is true, Adolf Hitler. It is critical to our nation's history that we introduce over 65 million people to the ideas of National Socialism. 65 million National Socialists. Wonderful, fantastic, this goal.
Most Germans still thought of Hitler as too radical, if they thought of him at all. But in less than 3 months, Wall Street would crash and take the German economy down with it. And within a year, the Nazis would be one of the largest political parties in Germany.
While we descended into misery and called anxiously for a savior, he emerged like a mountain. Columns march, drums beat, and 100,000 men stand firmly gathered around one man. Now, build up your people, O Master. A new great fatherland awaits.
It was 1932. This footage was recorded at a carnival near Leipzig, Germany. Filmmaker Walter Langer brought his 16mm camera and the girl he would marry. The atmosphere was joyful. But beyond these carnival gates, there were calls for revolution. If you were German and you wanted change, you had two choices. Either you joined the growing numbers of communists, or, like Walter Langer, you joined the Nazi Party. The Great Depression was in its third year, and Germany had suffered as much as any country.
German mother, your children's father and provider stands before the closed-down factories, unemployed, without bread, without the hope that his lot and life will change. German mother, you want a good future and freedom for your children. This is why you will vote on the 13th of March for Adolf Hitler.
On film, Walter Langer documented Hitler's first and only bid for elected office, the German presidency.
Mädchen sind wunderschön für Lulu, lass sich alle stehen, wenn sie kommt, sagt jeder voll Leidenschaft, fabelhaft. Mädchen sehen reizend aus, Lulu sticht sie alle aus, wenn sie tanzt, sagt jeder geheimnisvoll, nein, was soll.
Der Tag der Entscheidung naht. Hitler. Was diese Bewegung nicht zur Geltung in Deutschland derart kommt, dass sie die politische Macht.
If you opposed the Nazis, you were sure that this was the end of Hitler.
Hitler himself is still rather a handicap for the movement that has gathered around him. Besides, for ordinary Germans, his personal appearance is thoroughly repellent. The epileptic behavior, the wild gesticulations and foaming at the mouth, the alternately shifty and staring eyes. Most of those who have begun to acclaim Hitler would probably avoid asking him for a light if they met him in the street.
But in less than a year, Hitler would be Chancellor. It was the 10th of February, 1933.
Sie hören schon an den sich vermehrenden Geräusch, wie die fieberhafte Spannung zu wachsen beginnt.
Although they had never captured more than 37% of the popular vote, the Nazis were the largest political party in Germany. And so, German leaders installed Hitler as Chancellor. As many as 20 million people across Germany were tuned in to this radio broadcast. Hitler's largest audience ever.
Deutsche Volksgenossen und Genossinnen. Reich und arm, Stadt und Land, Gebildete, Wissende und Unwissende. Sie sind da, Aufgabe der Politik. Kann es nun nicht sein, deshalb sie getrennt zu organisieren, sondern Aufgabe der politischen Führung muss es sein, diese natürlichen Trennungen nun durch ein größeres Ideal, durch eine größere Erkenntnis zu überwinden. In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst unser Volk, unser Vaterland und unser Führer heil!
After this speech, Nazi Party offices were flooded with so many membership requests, they had to suspend admissions. Even so, Hitler did not yet control Germany. In 2 weeks, that would change. It was the morning of February 28th, 1933. If you lived in Berlin, you awoke to this. During the night, someone had set fire to Germany's parliament.
Just now, the revolution has begun in earnest. The middle class had been repelled by the roughness and lack of polish by the Nazis. Now, they've been frightened and won over by the Reichstag fire.
To this day, no one is certain who set the fire that destroyed the Reichstag. But Hitler knew who he would blame. His rivals, the communists. The Nazi press said that the Reichstag fire was intended as a signal for communist cells across Germany to rise up and revolt.
They wanted to send armed mobs into villages to commit murder and plunder. Hostages would be taken from the middle class wives and children of police officers used as human shields. The destruction of all cultural values, just like in Russia.
Hitler had invented a communist threat. Now he would use it to crush his opposition.
The morning after the fire, I discussed these matters with a few friends. All of them are very interested in the question of who really started the fire. And more than one of them hinted that they had doubts about the official story. But none of them were bothered that from now on, their telephones would be tapped, their letters opened, and their desks broken into.
Radical and violent changes were happening across Germany. But Hitler had justified them all.
This ruthless intervention by the government may appear strange, but we must clean up. The communists have to disappear.
Day after day, flags raised, buildings taken over, people shot, newspapers banned. It is shocking how naked acts of violence, breaches of the law, barbaric opinions appear quite undisguised as official decree. Actually, it's terribly risky even to be writing this. It was the 23rd of March. The communists were in jail. There was no one left to stop the new Nazi majority in Germany's parliament. When delegates voted to consolidate all power in Adolf Hitler. He had been chancellor for exactly 52 days. Now, for all intents and purposes, he was dictator.
We cry with happiness and joy. All traces of resistance have been eliminated. Enthusiasm grips the entire nation. We can barely believe that our beloved Führer stands alone at the helm of the Reich.
Church bells ring. Children wave flags. There are daily parades. The people have become used to cheering. even when there's no reason for it. It is reason enough that people who distance themselves from the Nazis are tortured to death daily with steel whips and electric drills. Better to celebrate. Howl with the wolves. Heil, Heil, Heil.
It was the 28th of March, 1933. Adolf Hitler had been dictator of Germany for 5 days. Even so, unless you openly opposed the Nazis, your life went on as before. But for some, that was about to change.
We are having lunch with a law professor and his wife. They are both Jewish. The amazing thing is that this clever, charming woman is not at all opposed to the Nazis. On the contrary, she lectures us on the outstanding qualities of Adolf Hitler, on the greatness of the age which we are allowed to witness, on the national rebirth. And she is firmly convinced that no harm whatsoever will come to educated Jews in Germany.
4 days after this lunch, Nazi Party member Walter Langer used his camera to document another historic moment in the new Third Reich. The Nazis were boycotting all Jewish businesses in Germany. Fewer than 1 in 100 Germans were Jewish. Most saw themselves as Germans first. Even so, Hitler said the Jews were Germany's misfortune.
Suddenly, everyone feels justified or required to have an opinion about the Jews and to state it publicly. Distinctions are made between decent Jews and others.
I sympathize with the Jews. However, I would support their conversion to Christianity, with all honesty.
Why do they still lie when they already have the power to do what they like? I want to know that. Why don't they just kill us? If that's what they want.
Wenn man die Zeit von heute betrachtet, dann merkt man leicht als Philosoph, was unsere Eltern einst geachtet, das scheint uns Kindern bisschen doof.
The National Revolution has not left children's souls untouched. Even the youngest children sing the Nazi Party anthem with burning enthusiasm and real devotion.
These photographs appeared in a Nazi propaganda publication in April of 1933.
These boys have invented a new game. A Nazi Party headquarters has been built with cloth and sticks. Inside the tent is a picture of Adolf Hitler. Things get lively when the communist headquarters, made of old trash cans, is stormed. It is searched. And the communists are taken off to a concentration camp. In the evening, the Sandman slips into their quiet dreams, drumming and trumpeting, and they sing, attack, and triumph.
Even little children knew what happened when you opposed the Nazis. This footage was shot at the Oranienburg concentration camp outside Berlin in the spring of 1933. It shows an orderly camp where prisoners are treated humanely. But if you were there, you would have experienced something much different.
No one ever knows when it will be his turn to be beaten, or for what he must be beaten. Those who are beaten up in the camp usually do not say a word, because they dare not. But at night, you could hear the groans and sobbing.
A friend tells this story. A man's garden was dug up. There was supposed to be a machine gun in it. But nothing was found. To squeeze a confession, they beat him. His corpse was brought back to the hospital. His body had boot marks on the stomach and fist-sized holes in the back. The official cause of death? Dysentery.
The message was clear. Opposition of any kind would not be tolerated. The Third Reich had begun its rise. It was January 1st, 1934. and the Nazis were ringing in the new year.
A year of success is behind us. People, state, and nation have become one. And the strong will of the Führer is over us all. Germany stands before the world as an unshakable unity.
But not everyone was welcome in the new regime. Only those citizens the Nazis believed were racially superior. And this year, they would begin to engineer more of them.
Lieber kleiner Heinebuttchen, wo kommst du auf einmal her? Kommst du von den 1000 Sternen oder kommst du aus dem Meer? Deiner Züge glatter Spiegel.
In 1934, Nazi Party member Kurt Hartmann and his wife Lotte welcomed this new baby boy. Ulrich Hartmann was lucky that his parents did not suffer from undesirable genetic traits. Because this year, the Nazis would begin surgically preventing those Germans from breeding. The Nazis made propaganda films like these to encourage compliance with the new law. But you could be forcibly sterilized for anything they considered a genetic flaw.
I have been informed by writing that I am to be rendered infertile. I reject this decision. I cannot understand why they want to sterilize me, since I've done nothing wrong. Anyone could have suffered from a nervous breakdown.
Emma was sterilized anyway.
I have noticed in these triumphant Nazi celebrations a new feature I never used to see. Behind the band and its following of brown-shirted storm troops, there is now a long tail of civilian flag wavers who never used to march with them.
It was the 25th of February. These Nazi loyalists were assembled in Munich for what was billed as the biggest oath-taking in human history. If you knew what was good for you, you joined them.
Der Programmverkündung gemeinsam den Schwur der Treue. Ich schwöre Adolf Hitler. Unverbrüchliche Treue. Unverbrüchliche Treue. Unbedingten Gehorsam. Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil!
In 1934, Kurt and Lotta Hartmann's oldest son, Peter, began school. Like other German boys, on his first day, he learned the mandatory German greeting, Heil Hitler. If you were an adult and you didn't use the Hitler greeting, you risked being sent to a concentration camp. So now, in public at least, it seemed as if everyone was a Nazi.
Everyone, literally everyone, cringes with fear. No letter, no telephone conversation, no word on the street is safe anymore. Everyone fears the next person may be an informer.
Summer, 1934. Nazi Party member Adolf von Hinüber filmed this footage here on the island of Borkum in the North Sea. He and his friends were welcome at this popular vacation spot. Jews were not. For decades, the residents of Borkum proudly claimed to be free of Jews. And this year, the Nazis would set that goal for all of Germany.
Unter der Fahne leben wir, unter der Fahne leben wir, unter der Fahne lauten ganz groß, fahren wir alle nach vorne sehen.
If you were a devoted Nazi Party member, the summer ended, as they all did, with the annual pilgrimage to Nuremberg for the party rally. For the faithful, this was the most highly anticipated event on the Nazi calendar. But the rally of 1934 would be particularly special. because this year they would film the most influential piece of Nazi propaganda ever made.
What I witnessed in Nuremberg is one of the most remarkable events I have ever experienced. I cannot compare it to anything I've ever experienced before as an artist.
Mein Führer, ich melde 52.000 Arbeitsmänner zum Appell angetreten. Heil, Arbeitsmänner! Heil, mein Führer!
To capture the glory of the Third Reich, filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl helped to stage it, directing and rehearsing this scene at least 50 times.
Kamerad, woher stammst du? Aus Friesenland. Und du, Kamerad? Vom Kaiserstuhl. Und du? Von der Donau, vom Rhein und von der Saar. Ein Volk, ein Führer.
The film Triumph of the Will premiered to worldwide acclaim, winning awards in Germany, Venice, and finally, Paris. Within a year of that award, Adolf Hitler was named Time magazine's Man of the Year.
A teacher in Dornberg had the children recite, "Jews are sinners. They slaughter Christian children. They cut their throats. The damned Jewish filth." The teacher threatened to punish the children if they would not learn the poem by heart by the following day.
It was September 15th, 1935, and once again, the Nazi faithful were gathering in Nuremberg. In a speech that was broadcast to the nation, Hitler addressed what he called the Jewish problem.
Ist der Versuch der Gesetzgebung und Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz zur endgültigen Lösung der Nationalsozialistischen Partei übertragen werden müsste. Hinter allen drei Gesetzen steht die Partei und mit ihr und hinter ihr die deutsche Nation.
After these three laws were read, The halls rang with minute-long applause. It was the call of a wild animal, a beast that smells blood.
Welcome to Berlin, capital of the German Reich.
It was the summer of 1936, and the world was coming to Berlin.
For Berlin, 1936 is the Olympic year, and therefore Berlin is presenting herself in festival dress. The main theme are the flags of the new party's designs, the black swastikas in a white circle on a red background.
Germany's capital was hosting the 11th Olympic Games. And the Third Reich produced tourism films like this to encourage foreigners to visit. Hitler wanted the world to see the Nazi Renaissance for itself. And so, for 2 weeks in August, the Nazis put on a show. If you were a foreign tourist at the Olympics, the Nazis might have convinced you that Germany was an open and tolerant nation. For the first time in 3 years, foreign newspapers were available for purchase. The signs prohibiting Jews from public parks or benches had been taken down. If you were German, you knew this was not Nazi Germany.
I find the Olympics so odious. It's constantly being drummed into the foreigners that here, one is witnessing the revival, the flowering, the unity of spirit of the Third Reich, which lovingly embraces the whole world.
Ich verkünde die Spiele von Berlin zur Feier der 11. Olympiade neuer Zeitrechnung als eröffnet.
Outside the stadium gates, Berlin's hotel and restaurant workers had been instructed to treat foreigners with extreme tolerance. Many American athletes commented that they had never been so well treated at home.
Foreigners who know Germany only from what they have seen here can carry home just one impression. It is that this is a nation happy and prosperous beyond belief, that Hitler is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, political leaders in the world today. And that Germans are a peaceful people who deserve the best the world can give them.
When the games ended, the tourists went home. Berlin returned to normal. And Lotte and Kurt Hartmann returned to Brunswick, where they screened their Olympic home movies for sons Ulrich and Peter. Peter Hartmann was proud to be a German boy. And so he joined the Hitler Youth. By 1936, all children over 10 were required to join, whether they were willing or not. Many thousands of new members were to be presented to Hitler as a gift for his 48th birthday. If you were a 10-year-old boy in Germany, you too might have wanted to join after watching films like this.
Sag Mutter! Ach, die haben abgekocht, geturnt und geschwommen und gesungen. Ein Lied haben die gesungen, sag ich dir. Und wie ging das noch? Das habe ich doch vergessen. Unsere Warte mal, jetzt habe ich. Unsere Fahne flattert uns voran.
For our field exercises, our squad has to find the other squad through military reconnaissance. Once the enemy squad is found, there are fistfights. This exercise is supposed to teach us that comradeship, as they call it, is formed in battle.
We are dreadfully worried. The boys won't listen to us anymore. When my wife insisted that our oldest obey, he drew his dagger and assaulted her. He shouted, "I belong to the Führer first. The family comes second."
Within 2 years, nearly 8 million children had taken the Hitler Youth Oath of Allegiance. I swear to devote myself to Adolf Hitler.
I am willing and ready to give up my life. So help me God.
In the end, many of them would. It was 1937. An amateur filmmaker, Walter Langer, celebrated his wedding by making this short film. Langer and his bride were exactly the kind of Germans Hitler wanted more of. Industrious, politically enthusiastic, and most importantly, Aryan. Women like Mrs. Langer were encouraged by the Reich to have as many children as possible. Because if the Third Reich was going to achieve its goals, it didn't just need better Germans, it needed more of them.
In the eyes of our beloved leader, the mother is the most important person in the nation. We are Germany's hope in the future. And it is our duty to breed and rear the new generation of sons and daughters.
This female division of the Hitler Youth was filmed hiking outside Munich in 1937. Participation was mandatory for these girls, who were required to document that they were Aryan and free of hereditary disease.
Dear Mother and Father, in our camp there are 48 girls. Near us is a boys' camp. We see the boys very often and mend their clothing as we spend the evenings with them. A funny thing, of these 48 girls, 35 are pregnant. And still funnier, I'm one of the 35.
Upon learning of her daughter's pregnancy, one girl's horrified mother rushed to the camp to investigate and discipline her daughter. The 16-year-old replied hotly that if her mother did not go home and leave her alone, she would report her to the camp leader, who would in turn report the mother to the Gestapo, who would then take action against her for sabotaging German motherhood.
Here's a bulletin from Vienna. Chancellor Hitler termed Austria the latest and greatest addition to the German Reich. A hysterical roar of cheers today in Vienna. The crowd was described as one of the greatest gatherings ever assembled in the Austrian capital. Meanwhile, an unidentified man fired at Nazi stormtroopers from a window and then shot himself dead. Later, at a downtown cafe, a man got up from a table, shouted Heil Hitler, and then stabbed himself.
It was the 12th of March, and Hitler was taking Austria. The treaty that had ended World War I forbade the union of Germany and Austria. But the majority of Austrians wanted it. As one foreign newspaper observed, if Hitler was raping Austria, then the Austrians liked getting raped.
Ich proklamiere nunmehr für dieses Land seine neue Mission. Die älteste Ostmark des deutschen Volkes. Weil von jetzt ab das jüngste Banner der deutschen Nation und damit des
Overnight, the German Empire had grown by 5 million citizens. Within days, 70,000 Austrians would be sent to concentration camps.
Nazi songs and Nazi salutes everywhere. The city is a sea of swastika flags. When did they manage to sew all these huge swastika flags? When did all our nice neighbors obtain their swastika insignia? What happened?
As I write, an immense flight of bombers is droning past overhead, as though these planes were flying against a world power. You, up there, I hate you. I do not know if I will survive your downfall, but this I do know. This is a caricature of Germany. Smeared by a malignant ape escaped from a leash.
It was the summer of 1938. And celebration was in the air. Here in Munich, the Third Reich was preparing to celebrate the Nazification of German culture. 200 miles north, in Leipzig, Walter Langer and his wife were celebrating their birthdays. He turned 40. And she 30. And in the nation's capital of Berlin, Jewish journalist Bella Fromm was also celebrating.
When I found myself outside the American consulate, the American visa in my hand, I had to sit down on the stone steps and cry in my grateful happiness. I'm going as soon as I can. I must manage to get out of Germany before it is too late.
It was the 9th of July, 1938. By special will of the Führer, the city of Munich was hosting a 72-hour festival dedicated to German art. If you were one of the many thousands of visitors, you would have seen the ideal Germany rendered in paintings, sculptures, and etchings, all hand-selected by Hitler himself.
I was conducted through the House of German Art. I could hardly believe my eyes. The trend is eroticism. To give German men the incentive to have many German children. And the glory of the German farmer who feeds the nation's warriors. And, of course, heroism in battle. Concluding the 3-day art orgy is a 6-mile-long procession celebrating 2,000 years of German culture, with floats drawn by army horses and thousands of men and women in costume. It goes on for 3 solid hours. At the end, the symbol of the Third Reich, the sovereign German eagle. But the climax, which brings the German spectators to their feet, is the goose-stepping soldiers. It is an admission of the Führer's restless plans for world conquest.
In less than 12 weeks, Hitler will move to invade neighboring Czechoslovakia.
Germany is one of the most popular tourist countries in the world. New national travel offices relieve the tourist of the usual travel worries.
But if you were a German Jew like Bella Fromm, moving around Germany was difficult. And getting out usually meant giving up everything you had.
I did not spare money on my travel, because I'd have to leave it in Germany anyway. To get out, I had to pay next year's taxes in advance, even though I will not be in Germany at all. But no price is too much. This is a country to get out of, even if you have to do it naked.
It was the 26th of September, and the annual Oktoberfest in Munich was in full swing. But in a few minutes, Hitler himself would put an end to the festivities.
Suddenly, the roller coasters stop. On the loudspeakers, the Fuhrer is raging against Czechoslovakia. Never have I seen such a large crowd change from elation to gloom so instantaneously.
Ich habe Herrn Bennett ein Angebot gemacht. Er hat jetzt in seiner Hand Frieden oder Krieg.
Hitler had demanded that Czechoslovakia cede a large portion of its German-speaking territory to the Third Reich. If Czechoslovakia refused, Germany vowed to invade.
Und hinter mir, das war die weltwichtige Macht. Wir jetzt ein Volk und war ein anderes als das vom Jahr 1908.
24 hours later, the evening of September 27th. Here in Berlin, German soldiers prepared for an invasion. In only a few hours, they would roll to the Czechoslovakian border.
Have the people any idea what they are being forced into? No, I don't want any part of it. We want peace. And tomorrow there will be war.
Safe aboard this gorgeous boat. It is almost too much for me to believe. Then, when I do become acutely aware of my good fortune, I almost feel guilty, remembering the unfortunate ones who wait, desperately hoping for their chance to get out.
On the day Bella Fromm sailed for America, this baby girl was born in the town of Halberstadt, outside Berlin. Wiebke Klamroth's mother and father are enthusiastic Nazis But it is only September of 1938. The Third Reich will last for another 7 years. And in those 7 years, Hitler will betray, impoverish, and ultimately destroy the Klamroth family. Along with the rest of Germany.
The image of Adolf Hitler, the Führer, leader of the Nazi Party, casts a long shadow over the second half of the 20th century. A vision of incomprehensible evil that endures today. But behind this figure was an ordinary man, a master manipulator whose talent for public speaking and deep understanding of how to effectively use propaganda propelled him to ultimate power. In the 1920s, Hitler used these skills to build the Nazi brand, relying heavily on words, images, and symbolism to define the struggle of the German people against unjust foreign oppressors and the traitors and enemies within their own country, endlessly repeating the same simple messages until they took hold. Soldiers marching in unison under the swastika. Crowds of party members and supporters in perfect rows, saluting their Führer. Symmetry and symbolism in flags, buildings, people, weapons, all communicating a single message: discipline, order, power. These are the images we associate with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party at the peak of their control over Germany. But this was born out of a carefully constructed narrative developed for over 10 years before Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. A pervasive, manipulative propaganda campaign that wrapped the truth of Germany's dire circumstances in the 1920s in a mythology of a new Germany that only Hitler could deliver.
The term propaganda always has these two lives. On the one hand, it is seen as a decidedly negative term that involves manipulation, brainwashing, fake news, and so on. On the other hand, it's a neutral term. It's about shaping, strategizing, communicating a political message with a view to persuading people, a particular kind of audience, to act in a particular way, and then looking at how they are responding to this in order to take the feedback and recalibrate that system of communication.
The place propaganda had in the Nazi Party's rise and regime remains infamous, but it was not the first time it had been used for mass manipulation and mobilization. Hitler's long relationship with the power of propaganda began in the trenches of World War I. There was a popular view in Germany, one that Hitler believed and perpetuated, that the Allied forces had won the First World War through their superior use of propaganda.
He could not believe that the great German army could have been defeated by illicit means. There had to be some kind of magic, which the British and Americans latterly used to destroy that great invincible army. It could not be by military means, and the particular necromancy he identified was propaganda. Suddenly it was the new thing. It was the happy pill, it was the hypodermic syringe, which would transform everything, and he had limitless faith in the power of propaganda because he blamed it for Germany's defeat.
propaganda had emerged as a powerful tool of psychological warfare, viewed as so virulent and manipulative that it would spark decades of debate about its power, its dangers, and its place in a democratic society. To Hitler, it was power, and he identified in Allied propaganda a superiority of style and substance that he would later emulate.
He noted that British propaganda was fundamentally believable. It did not diminish the fighting power of the Germans, whereas German propaganda portrayed the British as bumbling incompetents. And Adolf Hitler picked up on this idea that the sophistication of propaganda had to have a small element of realism in. If it was completely devoid from reality, then it ceased to be effective.
The new reality for Germany in the aftermath of the First World War was the humiliation of defeat, a reality that Hitler would use to fuel his propaganda. On the 28th of June, 1919, the German government agreed to a treaty at Versailles that was grossly unpopular with the German people. Under the treaty, Germany had to disarm, relinquish territories that effectively broke up their colonial empire, pay billions of dollars in war reparations, and accept fault for all losses and damage suffered by the Allies.
Versailles was a terrible shock to the German people. They had been told that really they weren't to blame, that they were encircled by Britain and the other powers. And Hitler personally took it as a great humiliation. He identified himself with Germany. So he exploited it very quickly and made a great use of it in his early propaganda.
Before Hitler could exploit the treaty and the sentiment of the German people, he would need to find a platform for his rhetoric. In September 1919, Hitler attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party, a small right-wing nationalist group with only a few dozen members.
And he saw in this nascent German Workers' Party an opportunity for his racial ideas, his national ideas, to find a home. And he saw opportunity too, because of the personnel he met, that he could become a leading figure in this.
By November that year, Hitler was one of the party's most important figures, the man responsible for their propaganda and recruitment.
He was originally their PR man, and what he did essentially was emphasize posters, the meeting on the poster. But the posters he produced were incredibly vivid and striking, with powerful colors, rich representations of various enemies, powerful images like dragons and so forth. And so this got them audience, and this was the first building block.
The second building block was words. Hitler believed in the power of speech to persuade an audience above all other methods. His particular brand of rhetoric and delivery, crafted in these early years, would remain a fixture of his propaganda methodology.
Deutsches Volk, besinne dich auf dich selbst, auf deine Vergangenheit, auf die Leistung deiner Väter, ja, auf die Leistung deiner eigenen Generation. Vergiss 14 Jahre Verfall und hebe dich empor zu 2000 Jahren deutscher Geschichte.
In the party's first mass meeting in February 1920, they renamed themselves the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. Here, Hitler presented the party's 25-point plan. What could have been a dull reading of political ideology, Hitler turned into a rousing speech.
Hitler had two particular advantages when it came to public speaking. The first was his unusual voice, which was actually a result of him being gassed in the First World War. And if you listen to Hitler's speeches now, there's a certain rasp to his speech, and that gives him an air of authenticity.
Nur wenn ihr selbst im Vertrauen und in Zuversicht hinter uns tretet, kann das große Werk der Rettung unseres Volkes und euer Selbst gelingen.
He's also an Austrian by birth, although he's picked up a Bavarian accent during his time in Germany. And this sets him aside from the other politicians in the 20s and 30s who are almost uniformly Prussians and speak with a very received form of German. He has a genuine voice, not merely from the army, but from the streets, from the provinces.
In his first year with the party, Hitler delivered speeches at over 30 meetings to crowds ranging from 800 to 2,500 people, quickly gaining a reputation as a masterful speaker.
It's extraordinary that before 1918, he had never really appeared in public in this way. He had never tried to address groups. He'd been a very shadowy figure in the army, and with no really strong opinions. It's not until the humiliation of 1918 that he arouses himself to think, there's a way out of this, there's a way I can make Germany great again. And I have the means by which to put the idea over.
Hitler would begin his speeches quietly, gauging the mood of the audience, and then build slowly. Working in stronger language and more dramatic gestures, raising his volume and pace until his excitement caught on with the crowd.
He found the short sentence, the rhetorical question, he realized worked very well with an audience that didn't want deep intellectual arguments. They wanted slogans. They wanted punchy statements they could relate to. And of course, he played upon that.
In every speech, Hitler spoke to the German people's discontent. Defeat in the First World War and the terms of the Treaty of Versailles was viewed by many Germans as their national shame.
Und muss sagen, den Frieden wollen wir, aber diese ununterbrochene Entrückung lehnen wir ab und die Entbehrung ertragen wir nicht. Bei Diktaten wirken wir nicht mit. Sie mögen ein Diktat als Diktat uns aufoktroyieren.
What we have is a very modern thing, the politics of grievance. A lot of what the Nazism he did comes across as a kind of protracted British whine. They were actually planting this idea of grievance and betrayal in the German people, and they did it very effectively, and there were good grounds for grievance. This was not irrational, there was substance to them.
Es soll aber aus diesen Opfern heraus bei uns die Entschlossenheit kommen, dir eins mit den Verantwortlichen an diesen Opfern ein unerbittliches Gericht zu halten.
Hitler gave the people enemies, an external threat to the German ideal. The Jews and Bolshevists that he accused of stabbing Germany in the back during the war. An idea that was fed by a long history of anti-Semitism in Europe.
If a propaganda message is aligned to popular perceptions, then it has already gained the attention of the people, and then it can start shaping popular perception, perhaps even in a different direction. A lot of the anti-Semitic propaganda that was put forward by the Nazi regime in the 1930s and during the war built on pervasive anti-Semitic stereotypical images amongst German society.
The stab in the back became a central notion of Hitler's rhetoric and a common motif in right-wing political commentary and Nazi propaganda posters. It was this stab in the back that Hitler argued had weakened Germany's position and allowed the signatories of the Treaty of Versailles, who he called the November criminals, to betray the German people.
The first thing was the leaders, those who had been prepared to compromise with the Allies in their demands and allowed Germany to be humiliated at a time when it should have shown resource and strength and resolution. And that was the idea he punched over in the beer halls, and it came across very well.
As Hitler's ability to draw large crowds grew, he began to expand the party's reach beyond meetings, buying the newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, or People's Observer, in December 1920. filling the paper with short, exaggerated pieces that repeated the same Nazi Party rhetoric that featured heavily in his speeches.
So propaganda, visual particularly, is the means by which you arouse people's attention. And Hitler said that people will believe what you tell them if you tell them in a strong enough way. He introduces the idea of the big lie. If you tell a small one, they might not, they might dismiss it. Tell a big lie and people will believe it. And tell the lie in a big way. Announce it, promulgate it. They went around with loud hailers, the Nazis, chanting slogans. And all this encouraged attention. It may have been negative in the sense that some people don't know that they're troubled, we don't want that. But they made themselves heard, they made themselves known. And it gets around.
Nicht weil es ihnen zu gut geht, können uns unterdrücken. Sie können uns meinetwegen töten.
After little more than a year as a member, Hitler was party leader. His influence and power as a propagandist were undeniable. This was not just because he was a charismatic speaker. He was also adept at drawing on everything from art and music to the activities of his political adversaries to construct a cohesive, compelling Nazi mythology. Hitler was known to love German myths and theater, in particular Wagner's operas and their use of staging, lighting, and music to amplify the emotional power of the mythological storytelling. Staging techniques that he would later use in his own events, rallies, and films. Despite being ideologically at odds with Germany's communists, the Nazi Party borrowed heavily from their propaganda methods in the 1920s.
The Bolsheviks had been great pioneers of propaganda, and they influenced the Nazis, partly because, of course, a lot of German soldiers had been prisoners of war in Russia. They'd had direct experience of the Russian Revolution. Secondly, the German army, and specifically the Air Force, trained in Russia after the First World War. The Bolsheviks allowed that. The 20s and early 30s were a protracted tutorial in the art of propaganda for both wings of the political spectrum.
Nazi propaganda repeatedly capitalized on their opponents' activities and brand recognition to draw attention to their own cause. Hitler would use the communist trademark red on Nazi posters and flags in a bid to attract German workers to their cause. He would send the Nazi Party's paramilitary stormtroopers, the SA, to opponents' meetings. There they would beat people up to get the party mentioned in rival newspapers. The staging of the Nazi Party's rise in the early 1920s was also heavily influenced by events in Italy. There, Mussolini and his fascisti were gaining ground, fueled by social discontent and fear among the middle class of a socialist uprising.
From Hitler's point of view, Mussolini was the absolute blueprint of how to contest the power of mainstream politics and how to get there.
As their influence grew, Mussolini and his black shirts prepared to march on Rome. But in October 1922, Mussolini was instead offered the role of prime minister and accepted. While Mussolini was handed power, he didn't pass up the opportunity for spectacle. Marching his black shirts through the streets of Rome in a highly orchestrated publicity stunt, a manufactured revolution.
The March on Rome was one of the great propaganda inventions of all time. Mussolini had to make it appear that it was a great populist outpouring of rage which just took control of the state in a coup d'etat.
The March on Rome had a number of different significances for Hitler. First of all, it was a spectacle. It was something that looked good on celluloid, on newsreel. Put this together, the theatricality, the novelty, and the brutal effectiveness of this, and you have a winning recipe for this new era of mass politics.
After Mussolini became Il Duce, Hitler would be more commonly known by his own version, Führer. Both simply meant leader. He even modeled the uniforms worn by the Nazi Party's paramilitary arm, the SA, on Mussolini's black shirts, except in brown. A year after the March on Rome, Hitler would attempt his own similar revolution, only to discover the disconnect between romanticized propaganda and reality. Conditions in 1923 Germany seemed ripe for uprising.
Two big things happen outside political control, really. One is inflation. Huge, rapid inflation which destroys the German currency. The other is the occupation by the French of the Ruhr region, occupation of factories, etc. Because Germany hadn't met its reparations commitments, the claim was. This aroused fierce indignation among the German people.
Hitler and General Erich Ludendorff, a national hero of the First World War, led roughly 2,000 Nazi Party members in a march into the center of Munich. There they were confronted by police with heavy machine guns. The revolution, or putsch, ended in a hail of bullets.
He underestimated the legalism of the German people and also the willingness of the German army to come over to him. But it was pure opportunism and really self-delusion that he misread not only German people, but not for the first time, German culture. In other words, Germany had a very strong civic state ethos. Doing a coup is something you do in South America, not Germany.
Hitler was arrested 2 days later and put on trial for treason. German constitutionalism and rationalism had prevailed. The failure of the putsch, named after the beer hall where the revolution began, was an important lesson for Hitler.
You had to stick by the book. You had to follow the law. You couldn't actually flout the law or delegitimize it because it would get you. You couldn't undermine the state militarily. You could do it in other ways, but those means had to be legal, and they included, of course, propaganda.
At his trial, Hitler turned the courtroom into his stage, using it to speak directly to the German people and position his actions as those of a true patriot. He returned to the Nazi Party's core messages, giving an impassioned criticism of the Treaty of Versailles, the November criminals, and the unfair terms of peace inflicted upon Germany.
And these speeches were reported in the national press. You'd be reading about this guy Hitler, and you'd think, Hitler was the man who really did the job. He failed, but, he tried. And that was a huge boost.
And Goebbels was one of many people away from Munich and Bavaria who first heard of Hitler. And we can trace this very clearly in a series of entries in March and April 1924, where Goebbels describes in his diary how he starts reading Hitler's speeches. He is immediately taken by the content and the tone of them. Bizarrely, he compares Hitler to Christ. He says there's something almost Christ-like about this figure, his passion, his enthusiasm, his nobility, his German feeling. These are the kind of words he used.
The trial turned Hitler into a national celebrity, both martyr and victim. A perception that was reinforced by Hitler's imprisonment and by the ban on him speaking publicly after he was released in December 1924. Later, the beer hall putsch would form a founding element of Nazi Party mythology. In prison, Hitler would begin to confer his ideology into his book, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle.
Hitler's book is really unusual as a kind of political manifesto. It starts with lots of personal stories about his childhood, his relationship with his mom and dad. Book before he says anything at all about politics. And then he later explains how his political worldview arises from these kind of personal experiences, emotions, personal dramas and stories. I think it's a moment where he's trying to establish himself as a serious politician and not just the leader of a protest movement. He's trying to root himself in a respectable cultural canon. And through that, of course, he's also trying to woo a new audience, not just the disaffected, but also, if you like, the cultural mainstream, the middle classes.
Mein Kampf functions both as a work of propaganda and a blueprint for Hitler's understanding of how to use propaganda as a tool for mass manipulation.
He talked about Hammerschläge, hits of the hammer, repeating your message until you have no resistance left in your audience. You have to develop an image of your enemy as dangerous, almost subhuman, and you exaggerate your message massively in order to bring people on side without them even realizing that they're being brought on side.
Through Mein Kampf, Hitler also detailed his notion of the racial state, the superiority of the Aryan and the role that society plays in supporting the superior race. Hitler argued that the state is a vessel and the race was its content, that the vessel has meaning only if it can preserve and protect the content. He positioned the Nazis as revolutionaries for their role in fighting for his idea.
He didn't know he was doing so, but he picked up on a very well-worn and well-used group of metaphors which are referred to as the Great Chain of Being. And according to the principles of the Great Chain of Being, you have living entities who are innately superior to others on a scale, and obviously humans are at the top. And then as he works down through the populations that he's interested in, he is much more effective talking about the people he considered to be his enemies.
The book was released in 2 parts, in 1925 and 1927. By 1933, it had sold around 1.5 million copies. Hitler understood that his role was to sell an idea, to convince the audience that he and the Nazi Party was their best and only choice. And he used every tool at his disposal to package and sell Nazi ideology. Words were important to Hitler, but symbols also formed an essential part of Nazi propaganda. A visual communication of what they stood for and what they reviled. Symbols of power and national pride. One of Hitler's first acts when he became head of party propaganda was to design the party's flag. Black swastika on a white circle in the center of a sea of red. As with many elements of Nazi imagery, this was symbolism with existing meaning.
Hitler spent hours in Munich Public Library looking at ancient symbols and refining them and refashioning them. The swastika flag, it had been used for years as a symbol on the German right. Hitler didn't invent it. It's emerged in many cultures over time. But Hitler stylized it. He stylized the flag, and all these symbol structures were his own design. He didn't have them delegated to some copywriter. He stylized them himself.
Hitler believed the National Socialist program could be read in the party's flag. In Mein Kampf, he wrote, "In red we see the social idea of the movement. In white we see the nationalistic idea. In the swastika, the mission of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man." For over 15 years, it would be present on flags, armbands, banners, posters. As Nazi influence, power and control spread, so too did the visibility of this symbol. It was a simple, visceral advertisement of the movement that spoke to their audience without a word being uttered. Hitler's salute, used by him for the first time in 1926 while surveying a parade of SA troops, was also derived from other sources. An ancient Roman gesture, it was already being used by Mussolini's fascisti.
The whole of fascism, the whole of Nazism really contains a sort of pastiche reminiscence of the glory of Rome and the symbols of Rome, and so it's really Heil Caesar.
The salute would become an important symbol not only of Nazism, but of the suggestive and coercive power Hitler had over his audience. Made a mandatory gesture for all party members as an acknowledgement of Hitler's supreme leadership. Hitler was also aware how important images were to instantly communicate an idea.
There was this notion of the world of masses, and the masses are moved by images, not so much by intellect and by argument and reason, but by emotion. And key to emotion is creating images.
The Nazi regime was incredibly adept at using the new mass media. That this is something that is completely transformed through technological innovation, cheaper printing, especially of photographic images. Now everything is suddenly illustrated that wasn't before, flooding the market, saturating the market, so it becomes a much more kind of visual sphere of politics. And the Nazis kind of jump onto that bandwagon very early on, and I think images are absolutely key to how they transport their message.
In Hitler's early years as a party member, he avoided being photographed at all. Later, he would create carefully planned and composed images with his official photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. It was Hoffmann who came to meet Hitler when he was released from jail, taking his photo outside the gates before they left. An image that was propagated across the covers of many German newspapers.
Hitler was convinced that image was everything. He needed to set himself up as a strong man and in opposition to all those elements that were working to bring down Germany. But to achieve all of this, he had to project his own personal image as a man who was almost predestined to take Germany back to its former greatness.
Before Hitler wore any new outfit in public, he would commission a photograph from Hoffmann. And he never allowed himself to be photographed wearing a bathing suit, in case it could be used as a source of ridicule by the press.
He was very wary of appearing absurd, in some context, of being ridiculous. He was a very sensitive man, very sort of sensitive to his own dignity. And so, his personal image, I think, was very important.
Hitler trusted Hoffmann enough that the two collaborated on a series of photos of Hitler practicing poses for his speeches. The images reveal the extent of Hitler's carefully practiced physicality, his focus on the importance of body language in communicating with his audience. His posture often stiff, his hands raised or fisted, his face always expressive, brow furrowed, resolute and serious. Poses designed to convey power and decisiveness.
Hitler spent hours rehearsing in front of a mirror to look good, to get all the kind of hand gestures right for the photographs. Hoffmann and his increasingly large staff were the official photographers of Hitler. They produced somewhere between 1 and 2 million pictures of Hitler in this relatively short time span, and nothing was published that Hitler hadn't personally cleared for publication.
After his release from jail, Hitler would have to rely on more than his skill as a public speaker to revive the Nazi movement. Banned by the government from public speaking until as late as 1927 in some parts of the country, Hitler turned to writing editorials for the newly relaunched Nazi Party newspaper, Völkischer Beobachter. On the 26th of February 1925, Hitler used the paper to publish his directives for rebuilding the party, a new beginning. Joseph Goebbels also used the paper to perpetuate the notion of Hitler as a larger-than-life figure of the nationalist movement. He wrote in July 1926 that insiders knew what Adolf Hitler's personality had meant for the solidarity of the movement in the past few years of struggle. The party also expanded their propaganda network, strengthening their grassroots movement. New chief of propaganda, Gregor Strasser, worked with a young Heinrich Himmler to organize party recruitment and strengthen ties with local groups across Germany, enabling them to, in turn, develop and use their own local propaganda specialists.
And we have to allow here, I think, for something that Hitler wasn't responsible for personally, and that is the spread of Nazism in the north. And the Nazis were strong under him in the south, around Bavaria, for example. But Strasser and Goebbels went north, and they spread the message there. So the identification of Nazism as a national movement is really down to people like Goebbels and Strasser, not simply to Hitler in the south. And that's an important phase in the development of the party.
Hitler revived the party rally at Weimar in 1926 and then moved the event to the new location at Nuremberg from 1927. Though in these early years, the event wasn't the polished, ceremonial construct it would later become.
It took a long time to refine the act, but they really were a way of solidifying the internal relationships within the party. When you got people to Nuremberg, you'd got them forever. And this really was the point. They were a great big combine of boot camp, summer camp, holiday camp, and evangelical revival rally.
By 1927, they had also started making films of their rallies, allowing more Germans to bear witness to this orchestrated projection of Nazi supremacy. Goebbels, in particular, was enamored with the power of film to captivate and persuade. His inspiration drawn from the most unlikely source, Soviet cinema. After he saw Battleship Potemkin, he was so impressed with the skill expressed in the film that he declared, "I wish we had one like it."
Goebbels had been interested in the cinema on a theoretical basis. He was somebody who seriously thought about for a long time about the cinema in a period when the cinema was going through its most extensive development. All the way from the German Expressionism, from the change from silent to sound and so on.
Early rally films were almost amateurish, standard documentary-style newsreel products. Not the highly stylized ode to the power of Hitler and the Nazi movement that they would be in later years.
I think you've got to bear in mind, at the time, this was an entirely new thing. The whole notion of news reporting or documentary cinema was entirely new. So how one went about this, how you filmed, where you filmed from, what made for a reasonable film, how you created a narrative, all of these things were entirely experimental. And so the first Nazi films were, I think, pretty crude, naive productions.
Not only were the Nazi Party novices in this medium, their resources were too limited to produce anything significant. They understood the power of compelling visuals, though, and these early experiences in filmmaking would ultimately build to a mastery of mass media propaganda tactics. Despite the advances Hitler and the Nazi Party were making, they were still considered to be a regional fringe party. The results of the country's 1928 elections confirmed this. The Nazi Party only attracted around 2.5% of the vote and won 12 seats in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. Ultimately, their fortunes would be turned by a series of events that shifted national sentiment once again, creating a crucible in which Hitler could light the fire of right-wing nationalism. American economist Owen Young proposed a new, rigorous plan for Germany to pay their war reparations. Signed in June 1929, it was an incredibly unpopular proposal that aligned the agenda of the Nazi Party with corporate Germany. Among Hitler's powerful new allies was media mogul Alfred Hugenberg. Hugenberg's media empire would drastically expand the Nazi Party's influence.
Hitler realized that he needed the support not merely of workers and the lower order of people, as it were, as he would call them. It wanted people of influence and finance. And Hugenberg had many contacts with industrialists, with people of note in society. Hugenberg called industrialists together, and Hitler meets them, and he gets money from them. He puts his ideas over to them, and he tells them, industry's safe in Nazi hands. If ever we come to power, it'll be a partnership. It won't be a Bolshevik takeover. You won't lose your position. You won't lose your ownership. We'll work together.
No one could compete with the force of Nazi rhetoric when combined with the reach and influence of their newfound resources. Hitler seized this opportunity to put himself and the Nazi movement into the center of German politics, eclipsing Hugenberg's own more conservative nationalist party.
He later regretted it, Hugenberg, obviously, because he didn't see quite where it was going. But it's a useful technique, using someone to get support from the established classes.
The personality cult of Hitler, supreme leader and messianic figure, was growing stronger, fueled by Hitler and his increasingly powerful propaganda machine. The building blocks for Nazi Germany, propaganda state, were in place. Then, the American stock market crashed on the 29th of October, 1929. And the ripples were felt around the world, including in Germany. The number of people without a job in Germany rose to astronomical numbers. By February 1930, the unemployment rate had skyrocketed to 3.4 million people. By 1932, 6 million people were out of work. Faith in the system was crumbling.
When people ask me, how on earth did the Nazis come to power, I would say, well, you have to understand that Germany in the late 20s, early 30s was in a massive crisis, a political crisis, an economic crisis, a social crisis. The system was breaking down.
Demonstrations and at times violent street protests were rife, instigated by both the Nazis and their leftist adversaries.
People felt, well, in a sense, democracy has been imposed on us by the Allies, with the Versailles peace settlement and so on. And it hasn't delivered the goods. It's just not working, and we have no real respect for it. The majority didn't feel, in a sense, it was part of a strong German tradition.
Hitler capitalized on this crisis by presenting himself as the savior, the only one to bring Germany back from the brink.
The Nazis very cleverly appealed to the nation and said, we are a party in favor of the national community. That was the slogan they used, the Volksgemeinschaft. So they were appealing and saying, we are the national party and we are going to save the nation. And look at all these other parties. They're just interested in their own selfish, their particular interest.
It worked. When Germany went back to the polls in late 1930, the Nazi Party vote increased to 6.4 million, winning them 107 seats and making them the second largest party in parliament. By 1930, Nazi propaganda efforts were not only focused on how Germans consumed information. This was as much about preventing access to other ideas as it was about what Hitler and the party were saying themselves. When the anti-war film All Quiet on the Western Front was released in late 1930, Goebbels organized the Nazi Party's efforts to disrupt the film's premiere.
Goebbels at this point believed very strongly that the party in Berlin needed publicity. So in his view, any publicity was good publicity, and anything which therefore could generate a sensation in the newspapers was an ideal opportunity for that.
He later described the moment they succeeded in turning the crowd, who were yelling, "Jews out," and "Hitler is at the gates." To avoid more protests, the film was banned from being shown in Germany. Goebbels and the Nazi Party had won an important battle. As he put it, the National Socialist street is dictating behavior to the government. 1932 began with Hitler challenging Hindenburg, the incumbent president and old ally of Hitler and the Nazi Party, for the presidency. The Nazi Party campaign had Hitler as its star and Goebbels as its architect.
Goebbels threw himself into that cause, and he discovered that he was actually very good at electioneering. And his particular brand of electioneering, which was focused around public speaking, around the use of political posters, cartoons, public demonstrations, he found he was absolutely brilliant at this.
Between April and November 1932, Hitler conducted 4 airborne campaigns across Germany, reaching an incredible number of people, targeting rural Germany as well as the big cities.
And here you actually see the Nazis at their stage managing best. A moment of pure theatre, that Hitler is in an aircraft flying over Germany, a tremendously modern thing to do in the late 1920s. It emphasises the fact that Hitler is something different, he's something modern. He's a force of energy who can change things.
This was a campaign where Hitler could make full use of one of his greatest weapons, his skill as an orator.
Ich habe Fähigkeit gehabt, von den damaligen 1000 Mann vor 10 Jahren bis heute 14 Millionen zu machen. Und ich werde aus den 14 Millionen die 20 und die 30 Millionen machen.
Hitler spoke at over 150 rallies to audiences of up to 30,000 people, getting in front of as many people as possible to engender a personal connection. In every speech, he positioned himself as the agent of change, ready to save Germany.
14 Jahre lang haben diese Parteien die deutsche Freiheit vergewaltigt, den deutschen Menschen geknebelt und geschlagen. 2 oder 3 Monate vergangen sind, wird euer Terror beseitigt sein. Verwahren wir Nationalsozialismus!
By contrast, Hindenburg was positioned as representing the status quo that they needed to uproot.
It was strategically difficult for Hitler to deal with the phenomenon of Hindenburg, the great general of the First World War, the great symbol of German patriotism and Prussian integrity and discipline. So he had a positioning strategy. He said, he is our great leader, but the time has come for a younger man.
The Nazis' campaign was also significantly boosted by Hugenberg's media empire. He gave Hitler and his party message exposure through newspapers and weekly newsreels. The reach of the Nazi Party campaign was also achieved through Goebbels' clever poster marketing. Many designed entirely around Hitler's persona as savior of Germany. They made no specific promises and explained no policies. One showed nothing but Hitler's face appearing from darkness, his name spelled out in bold letters beneath his head.
The idea of presenting the man, and that bold, full-frontal, straight look at the camera, his face alone becomes identifiable, and no politician was identifiable in that same way. Very clever piece of psychology, very basic, very simple, but people will look and see this is a pre-television age. People get their ideas either from the cinema, newspapers, or the public place. And the public place is skillfully used by posters.
Common symbols of Nazi ideology also pervaded their campaign posters. In one, the strong, physically powerful Aryan, towering over the figures that the Nazis blamed for Germany's problems. The Marxist in his red cap, the Jew whispering in his ear. Behind them, another figure wields a bloody knife, evoking the popular Nazi narrative of the stab in the back. The poster declares, "We workers have awakened." Using bold colors, strong imagery, and simple slogans, they captured the attention of the people.
If you look at the posters of the other parties, they're really dull. They've got numbers on them, they've got very boring slogans. They still live in a rational world, whereas what the Nazis offered was vividness and color. And remember, this is a world where the entertainment distractions we have today were far, far fewer.
Their campaign methodology may have been radical, but it still wasn't enough to gain Hitler power.
The Nazis were not elected into power. The most they got before Hitler was appointed Chancellor in the vote was 37% in July 1932. In November 1932, their vote dropped to 30%. And in January 1933, the newspapers in Berlin were writing him off. They were saying, you know, the whole Nazi thing is kind of ground to a halt. It's on its way out.
Despite the Nazi Party's faltering trajectory, President Hindenburg still viewed Hitler as a threat that he was desperate to control. And to many in the right, the threat of communism seemed greater.
They were frightened that if Hitler was not appointed, then the left would take over. And the only support which the right might be able to have was the Nazis. They felt, right, okay, we'll have to do a deal with the Nazis. Of course, you know, Hitler's an amateur. He's somebody who has no education, really hasn't been to university. We'll be able to control him. I think Papen at one point said, don't worry, we've hired him.
Von Papen and the conservatives, Hugenberg and so forth, thought that they could tame Hitler. This was a common delusion that somehow the possession of power, his treatment as a great dignified statesman and so on, would draw out his fangs, and the Nazis would be nothing more than rather rumbustious conservatives, thigh-slapping, beer-drinking conservatives, but still conservative. They were nothing of the kind. There is a huge difference between a right-wing conservative and a revolutionary. A fascist, a Nazi, is a revolutionary. They don't believe in the things the others believe in.
Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor on the 30th of January, 1933. Just under 10 years after the failed Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler had finally completed the first great leap to ultimate power. That night, the Nazi Party and their paramilitary arm, the SA, marched through the streets in the thousands, celebrating the rise of their leader as Hitler stood illuminated in the window of his chancellery office. On that night, Hitler succeeded in delivering the brand he'd spent 10 years building. He had become both statesman and savior. The highly orchestrated celebrations were a display of nationalistic fervor that foreshadowed the country that Germany would now quickly become.